Welcome, viewers, back to the Preaching Humanist with David Oliverio. Today is going to be a great topic, the Great Awakenings. Today I will discuss the Christian perspective of their movements, and every time there has been a push of secularism in our wonderful country here in America, we've moved and we've progressed ahead. You will see, and my argument today will be, that you will see a pushback of religion and Christianity. So I would like to entitle this The Great Awakenings. I will discuss the 5 Great Awakenings, the Christian worldview. They believe that these have been movements of God, right, based on the answers to their prayers. The religious right's pushback of American secularism. Every time there's a movement of progressivism, letting belief in the supernatural go slowly, and we start advancing as human beings, then we always have that pushback of religion. And my argument today is we are about on the brink of what Christians would call the 6th Great Awakening, based on their prayer life. The answer to their prayer, in their minds, has started. All with this new government we have, started on January the 20th, 2017. We have people like Betsy DeVos in the cabinet, who actually is not afraid and ashamed to say that her goal and objective is to promote God's kingdom in schools. We have Mike Pence, a hardcore theocrat, who lacks belief and mocks evolution. We now have a guy named Ben Carson, an educated neurosurgeon who believes that Charles Darwin himself was influenced when he came up with the, as he calls it, the theory of evolution by Satan. Satan put these thoughts in his mind. And I will argue today that every 50 to about 100 years, since 1740, it's been a while ago, every time we, as a secular community, begin to advance and make progress and move into human rights and egalitarianism, there will be a pushback from the religious right. We are seeing that now. So let's go back quickly and go over the first 5 Great Awakenings. The first one started approximately 1740. The French skeptics, the enlightened thinkers in Europe. We have Francis Bacon, John Locke, Spinoza, my favorite, Voltaire, Rousseau, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and so forth. The Great Awakening started around that time, pushing back against humanism, secularism. We begin to advance as a nation. In fact, our Constitution and Bill of Rights were influenced by the Enlightenment, the enlightened thinkers, by the skeptics from Europe. And as soon as that began, around 1790, after the Revolutionary War, we see a pushback of religion. And here we have Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield and other preachers from Europe coming over to the States. And again, trying to revitalize and push back against secularism. And you're going to see this around every 50 to 100 years. We see people advancing and moving ahead. And by 1790, because 1740 was the first awakening, by 1790, after the Revolutionary War, we see Americans going about their business, building our country and moving westward. There was another decline of Christianity. There was another decline of belief in God and church attendance in America, as they moved westward, trying to build our country and going about their business. Then we have another pushback called the Second Awakening in about 1790. More preachers came over across the pond, the Atlantic Ocean. Charles Finney and many others came over to revitalize and to create another revival of Christianity. And it's interesting that every generation needs another shot of Jesus, right? The Jesus pill, the Jesus drug seems to run out with every generation. every push towards secularism. And by 1857, America again was sinking back into another spiritual sluggishness time when they need to be revitalized. The church was declining in numbers like we're seeing now, which is good. And again, another push came. In 1857, it was called the Prayer Revival, which started in New York City. They were crying out, believers, were crying out to God. Using 2 Chronicles, the Bible, if my people which are called by thy name shall pray, humble themselves, and seek the face of God, God will heal their land and forgive them of their sins. This is the Christian worldview in our country. They don't want us to become more secular. They don't want us to progress. They want to go back using biblical law and theocracy. Well, in 1857 was the third awakening. And by the turn of the century, in 1900, we began the Industrial Revolution. Again, Christianity began to become more sluggish. Fewer people attended church. Fewer Christians had the fervor and the fire of passion for Jesus. And they started thinking about the Industrial Revolution, going on and progressing ahead as a country, using reason over faith. Well, after this decline, another pushback called the Welsh Revival, a movement that started across the Atlantic Ocean in Europe, moved to Tennessee, the foothills of Tennessee. We had some preachers beginning to preach and reviving the Christian movement in the central part of the country. That moved to the West Coast, called the Pentecostal movement, in around 1900. I'm a result of that. My parents were Pentecostal preachers. My grandparents, who came over from Italy, were Catholic, reconverted to Protestantism, and they became Pentecostal Christians way back in the early 1900s. So we have another push and movement called the Fourth Awakening in the early 1900s. And again, as usual, we have a decline of Christianity in our country. The Fifth Awakening occurred in the 1960s to 1970s. I was a part of that. We had a secular push in the 60s called civil rights, equality, anti-war, feminine rights, women pushing for equality, blacks, African Americans pushing for equality. All these different movements started in the 60s and 70s. And of course, there's always a Christian pushback called the Fifth Awakening. That started in the West Coast in San Francisco. The coffee house movement. There were a few people in San Francisco back in the 60s and 70s that began to start Bible studies and prayer revivals and church services during the hippie movement in the 60s and the 70s. And that spread throughout California, and that was called the Jesus movement. I remember the Jesus movement in the 60s and 70s. Then we had the Christian rights movement. The Christian right movement in politics. The religious right began in the 70s and 80s. And we've seen the pushback of religion and Christianity again. We've seen our government pushing that way. And then about 8 years ago, when President Barack Obama took office, and we had someone who is more of a progressive liberal, someone who is more of a moderate liberal, seeing the need for equality for all. We begin to see 8 years ago a beautiful move in the right direction, away from religion and into what our Constitution actually says. Our Constitution is the supreme law of the land. We are not governed by the Bible. We're not governed by Christianity. We're governed by the Constitution. So we see the last 8 years, we've seen some wonderful things happening in our country. LGBT rights. Same-sex marriage is now legal. We've seen a movement that way, and we've seen Christianity declining. Now, I will say that I know about this. Why do I know this? Because I'm a former Christian preacher and evangelist, born and raised into the environment in a preacher's house, very Pentecostal, very fundamentalist, evangelical Christian movement. I was there in the 60s and 70s. I started preaching in the 70s on all the way through the 80s. We wanted, I know how they think. I know how the Christian right thinks because I was one of them. It was called dominionism. It hasn't changed. They, the Christian right, want this country to be Christian. They want to take over. They want to dominate. They want to change the rules and laws based on the Bible, not the Constitution. The last 8 years, we've been moving in the right direction until January 20th, 2017. Now we have a very theocratic, very right-wing government who will do anything they can to promote Christianity and make it a law. Now, am I being a victim? Am I acting like victimology? No, I don't want to portray myself as that type of person. But I do want to say, fellow atheists out there, this is the time to not sit on our seats. This is the time to get up and put a face on that which is being humanized, dehumanized. We must let them know, the Christian right, that we demand equality, that we demand freedom for all. That's what this movement is about. The Christian right does not understand why we lack belief in a God. That's why I go out on the weekends and perform atheist activism, holding up this and answering questions. And also my other one, which I've shown you many times before, secular humanism, good without God. What we need to do is to fight back. And they are not going to give up. The Christian right will continue to push back every time there's a move of secularism. Now I'm going to take, and I'm closing with this, I'm going to read from an article written by a very, very evangelical Christian pastor, who's an author as well, from his article about the Great Awakenings. This article was written back in 2013, prior to our new government that we have now. I'm going to read the end of the paragraph, and this is the Christian perspective, the Christian worldview. And remember, they believe, they, the Christian right, believe with all their heart that this new government, the Trumpers, is an answer to their prayer. They have been praying. I remember we used to do this. They have been praying to turn to God, that He would answer their prayers, that America would once again repent of their sins and come back to Christianity, to fire-breathing, Holy Ghost revival Christianity. That's the movement. I kid you not. Been there, and I've done that. As I say all the time, BTDT, I've been there and done that, baby. Now let me read this article, the end of the article, the last paragraph, written by Robert J. Morgan, a very evangelical fundamentalist pastor. He wrote this back in 2013. Now it's time, quote, now it's time for another revival. America cannot be saved from politics, and the answer isn't in being a Republican, Democrat, or independent. Our economists and educators can't save us. Well, I never thought they would. Our entertainers offer diversions without meaning, and our technology gives us progress without morality. Well, I've never claimed that technology brings us morality at all, or entertainers. It's a very simple concept. Secular morality far surpasses the morality of these primitive books. Secular morality promotes and increases the well-being of humanity, and demotes and declines and reduces suffering. It's a very simple idea, what morality is. Back to the article. We've seldom been in greater need for inner revitalization. Now again, this is coming from the Christian worldview, the right-wing Christian movement. The past 8 years since Obama's been in office, we have progressed into secularism more and more. We've seen a decline in Christianity. We're down to 70% now of Americans that consider themselves Christian, which is a dramatic change, a reduction from years ago. We've been heading in the right direction, but now they're trying to revitalize the believers and go back. Conditions, he says, are urgent. Join me, this preacher says, in making Psalm 85 verse 6. I don't have time to go back and read this, but this is a chapter in the Bible where the psalmist David, allegedly, is crying out to his God that God would restore and turn the Israelites back to serving their God. He says, join me in making Psalm 85:6 a daily prayer for our nation and world. Will you not revive us again, and your people may rejoice in you? Quoting from Psalm 85. Now, this is what his statement says and the end of his article. And this, my dear free-thinking friends, is the Christian right view. The answer to their prayer, the sixth great awakening, which I think, I may be wrong, I'm not prophesying because I don't believe in prophecy, I don't believe in the supernatural, but I believe that this would be what they would call the sixth great awakening. This is it, and they believe this will probably usher in the second coming of Christ. Right. Here's what he says. This, the sixth great awakening, is the only hope for our nation and the greatest need for our world. In his worldview, our nation needs to be revitalized, to turn back to the Bible and to Christianity. And the greatest need for our world. Now, again, as I say all the time, actual data, quantitative evidence shows that secular communities are healthier. And the more we progress with secularism, and the less we use these primitive books, Christianity and Islam and the other religions, we tend to be healthier societies. So the actual opposite is true. But this is their worldview. The sixth great awakening is overdue. Well, there you have it, my free-thinking friends. It is time for us to speak. It's time for us to stand up. It's time for us to get motivated and to go out and talk to people and let them know that we can be good, we can progress as a country, we can promote morals and ethics based on secular morality. We can keep progressing into secularism just like the U.S. Constitution says. So there you have it, folks. It's time to rise up, put a face, a human face, on that which is being demonized. That's coming out as atheists and talking to people. Remember, visibility and awareness are the keys to acceptance. Let's keep ahead. Let's push ahead with secularism in our country. Have a wonderful day, and remember that no God is required for a life of love, joy, peace, fulfillment, meaning, and purpose in life. And the good life is one guided by reason and motivated by love.